everyone. Welcome to The Heart of It, where we talk all things family life from a Christ-centered and Orthodox perspective. I'm Clara Bertan, and I'm so pleased to have on the broadcast with us Dr. John Danial. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, John, so you are a clinical psychologist, you're a father, a dad, someone who's involved in youth ministry, and also someone that I just really appreciate your thoughtful, your humor also. Hopefully we get to see a little bit of that today. Someone who's just very intentional about the way that they think about things. So I know we're going to have a really great conversation today, God willing.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So today we are talking about what it means to take care of our hearts as parents, especially as we manage maybe challenging behavior or things that we see coming up for our children that require something of us that's hard to tap into, especially if we're not being intentional about taking care of ourselves and kind of what that means. So it's a little bit of a broad topic, but I know we're going to kind of really pinpoint what our role is and how to take care of our hearts in that process. But before we jump into the content, I was wondering if you do one fun would you rather question with us.
Okay,
awesome. So would you rather live twice as long or win the lottery?
It's going to be a hard one. No, win the lottery. For sure.
Okay. Yeah. Because also what happens with 160-year-old at this point? But what if you had your health for that whole time?
Well, are the people I love living twice as long too?
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
okay.
I want to outlive everyone.
Okay. Got it. So that there's a stipulation there that the core circle comes along with you. Would that make a difference?
No, we'll win the lottery and enjoy
have
our
a good
lives.
life. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Makes sense. I think that one's I'm with you there as well. Okay. Awesome. So let's dive in then. So John, share with me what it means to take care of our hearts as parents and maybe why that is especially important for us in parenting, like taking care of our heart as an individual in the context of parenting.
So the way I see parenting, it's the core of it. It's this relationship. And a lot of times we might reduce it to behaviors. Like I'm going to feed my kid, get him to school, get him clothed, all this stuff. And those are kind of like checklist items that, of course, as parents, we have to do. But if we're really thinking about what parenting is, it's a relationship. And in any relationship, we have to consider our readiness for the relationship, what we're offering, what we're able to receive, what we're able to give. And if we're not mindful of what's going on for us as parents, what our anxieties might be or our challenges or our stresses or all this stuff, then we're not going to be able to see how all those things are playing out in the relationship with our kids. But when we do take that time to pause and reflect and notice where I'm at and why and how to take care of the pieces that are feeling harder, we're going to show up so much more present, so much more in the moment with our children.
Mm-hmm. So you're sharing this key piece of being attentive, recognizing kind of what's happening within ourselves, maybe as the precursor to being able to be present then with our children. It's really hard to be present with anyone, but particularly a child who has needs, who's coming to us. I mean, certainly our children come to us for a lot of things, but that process is especially hard if there's something missing in the way that we are perceiving where we're at as people.
Exactly. And sometimes too, if we're reducing how well we're doing to how our kid is doing.
Got it.
And so now they're having a tantrum, they're upset, and that's telling me how I'm doing. It's going to put a lot of pressure on those moments. It can put a lot of pressure on the kid eventually, right, in some way, and on the parent too. So it's prioritizing, checking in with ourselves as parents, and the rest is going to follow.
From there. And what you're speaking to, when we kind of don't do that process well, is what can feel then very transactional for us as parents. It doesn't matter how I do it. If I get the result that I'm looking for in the behavior or my kid's in line in some way, then I'm okay. Even if I'm dysregulated, even if within my heart, I'm not doing things in a healthy and godly way, it just becomes about the outcome then in that process.
Yeah. And I would say too, the inverse. So
Mm.
how helpless it feels, how terrible of a parent I must be when I'm not seeing those outcomes. And if the outcome's the only thing telling me how I'm doing and I'm not looking inwardly
Mm.
to
Mhm.
what I want to be doing or how I want to be showing up, that's a very helpless, powerless
Yeah, yeah.
place to be
Because
in.
we can be trying our best, really. And I mean, certainly sometimes we're not.
Yeah.
We can all admit to those moments as parents, but we could be doing our very best and then still seeing that our child is struggling with something. And as you're saying, like, if that result isn't then how we're measuring that, then what becomes the measure? So help me then understand, John, like, how can a parent begin to recognize when their responses are more about what they're going through? Like, how, if I'm a parent and I'm struggling with something, like, how do I begin to recognize that this is more about me or my unresolved issues or where I'm struggling versus my child's behavior?
There's so many, different ways that can look. But I think the most important thing, if we're reflective on how we want to show up with our kids, how we want to handle the tough moments, the type of parent I want to be. So if we're spending some time with what we want that to look like forward, and then we're noticing, oh, I'm falling short of that, or as I often do, as we all are going to do, and we can notice there's something happening for me that I'm not able to show up that way that I really want to enjoy my kid, to not be thinking about work, or to not be having something else on my mind, or the noise is so overwhelming, or all the things that can happen for us as parents. If first we have to have a benchmark of what we actually want, what our goal is as parents, and then we can notice, is it really just what's in front of me, the situation that's making that hard? Or is there something I'm not taking care of, like stress or my own worries or relationship things like that, that typically would
Mhm.
interfere?
Mhm. So I'm hearing you say there's maybe a step that has to happen before that where
Mhm.
we begin to recognize what we want to see in our children, how we want to show up. And again, like, not seeing our children as in like behaviors, right? But the kind of parents we want to be, the kind of maybe calm, godly,
Yeah.
healthy responses, people who are present in the moment with our children. And then noticing those moments that are kind of roadblocks or barriers to that and what might be then happening for us in those moments.
Right. Yeah. And the moments you described earlier, that's like most of my my house, right? So then it's easy to just get sucked into that and letting that be the case all the time, or we can pause and notice, like, wait a minute, right? What do I need to take care of, or what do I need to get some space for myself, or whatever it is, so that the next moment
Yeah.
can look a little different.
There's a quote by Saint Pope Carlos, and hopefully I don't butcher it, but he says there's no good days or bad days, only days with prayer and days
Mm,
without prayer. And I almost think of that kind of in the parenting sense, like maybe there aren't good days and bad days, but there's days where we've been prayerful with our children, we've been intentional about our parenting, and even if we're not getting the, like, again, the results in those days and in those moments, like, we can feel good, like
yeah.
going to bed, being present before God and saying, like, I did my best, even though this was a challenging day or a challenging behavior that I was dealing with.
Right. Right. And then less pressure on how that goes.
Yes, that less
Yeah.
pressure piece I think is really key because for us, I think oftentimes, like, culturally, like, there's just like a huge amount of pressure that's self-inflicted, that's put on us. That
Yeah.
if the day doesn't look this way, if your child doesn't behave this way, then somehow you're doing it wrong, which I think is, again, like you're saying, a really bad metric for our parenting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So then help me understand the role then of unmet needs, right? Because as individuals, as like a wife, as a husband, like, there's needs, right? Like, either like kind of on a spiritual, relational, maybe physical level, and how then those play out if they're not met in how we show up for our children in our parenting.
Right. One thing we don't want to happen, but that just naturally happen. And all these things too, it's not, oh no, it's happening. It's natural that it's going to happen. So we want to just notice and reflect. But one of those is just what you're talking about. What are the ways that I might be kind of needing my child, or the way things are going at home with my kids to meet a need that I'm not meeting. So what it can look like for a lot of parents, we've talked some about it, is things like overly stressed. I'm doing too much all the time. Had a crazy day. I had this and that and all of this. And so then when that parent comes home and the things that kids do, they add on, right? To they have needs too. And it can feel like that's a problem, even though that's what they're supposed to be doing, because I don't have the capacity or the to take care of another thing.
Mhm.
So then the question for a parent that's struggling with that is going to be, how can I take some things off my plate? How can I pause before I enter the home? How can I approach my child with an awareness that that might be happening for me, and what I want to do to take care of that, so the the child doesn't have to take care of that
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm.
Another really common one might be, let's say there's some relationship difficulties between um, parents or spouses, or it doesn't even have to be between the two of them, but common one might be, um, I see this trait or this quality in my 8 year old, or in a parent's 8 year old, that reminds that parent of their spouse. And so all of a sudden, that parent is going to be parenting the adult version of that kid and not letting them turn into that adult quality, that's what's really happening in that moment, rather than being present with the 8 year old, being present with what's actually happening, for that child in that
Mhm.
moment. And a lot of times it's because that parent might not know how to approach or address the actual problem, the actual need. Again, whether it's for them individually or in context of a relationship.
Mhm. Okay, so two key pieces in what you're sharing. There's the mindfulness piece, like in transitions, the stress that we're carrying into the home sometimes. And I guess for me, like I'm imagining myself like maybe coming into the house from like a hard day, or maybe I'm just carrying a load of something, and then like all of a sudden we're expected to, not all of a sudden, but hopefully we're
Yeah.
expected to be again emotionally present for our children, attentive to their needs, like physically taking care of them. And so give me maybe something like maybe more practical for me to do as a parent if I'm noticing that stress, if I'm noticing like this burden that I'm carrying where maybe there's no margin. You're saying, "Okay, like, let's get some things off of our plate, but what can I do in those transitions? How can I become more aware so that I'm not carrying those things into my parenting?"
The best things we can do as parents are before the moments and after the moments. During the moments are really tough, especially if we're not doing anything before. So the the best thing that we can do is enter those moments intentionally. So we probably know when we're stressed and when this day has been a rough one, and when, so can we communicate to our spouses about that? Hey, just heads up, I'm low on patience today. I'm going to really try with the kids, and maybe there's some partnership there in those moments, right? Um, Another one like along those lines is, if I know that, and I know in this moment there's not much I could do other than the the evening is starting, all the needs are there, and so on, then almost have a bit of a check in with myself. I'm going to need some space tonight. I'm going to take some time to myself in prayer, or just decompress, or whatever it is. And it's sort of that reminder that that's part of my plan, that reminds us that this need can get met. But right now, I'm going to be here with my kids and what they need, and so on. And just say, be nice to ourselves in those moments. So if probably not, I don't know, going to look like the Brady Bunch, or
Mhm.
whatever sort of
Yeah.
unrealistic
Yep.
parenting standard where might be in our mind, but can I be all right? Can I be good enough? in that moment is a really important question for us.
Yeah, that piece of asking for help, being intentional about what we need so that we can be successful, whether it's partnership with our spouse, or even I think of like what it means to tell my kids that, I'm also struggling with
Right.
something, like to say like, hey guys, like just had a long day, like mommy's a little thin on patience today. That doesn't mean it's an excuse or a justification, but like, can we, help each other out just a little bit, and maybe letting go of the things that aren't like absolute bare necessities. Maybe not all the homework gets done today. Maybe it's takeout for dinner, and so we give a little bit of space for maybe some downtime or bonding. Like again, like releasing that pressure valve. I think that you shared a little earlier is so important.
I love that because that's less pressure on what it needs to look like and more awareness of what the moment calls for, what's happening right now. And within that context, what can we
Mhm. Yeah.
help make it look like?
Yeah, and I think we communicate then to our kids in that moment that they're our priority. Their hearts are priority, not cooking dinner, not getting their homework done, not this project that, yes, is very important, but ultimately all those things are nowhere near as important as the relationship, as our child's heart, as we manage kind of where we might be needing to navigate our hearts a little differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I love what you shared about letting them in. And sometimes that's another thing that we can do when we're starting to notice ourselves escalating or, of there rather than just snapping in that moment um or check in first. And then that's a good time too. It's like, I'm really trying not to raise my voice right now. I I don't like the way that feels for me. Do you like how that feels? And I'm struggling with what else to do because I've asked 3 or 4 times now and still. So what do you think we should do? And it's almost cueing them in to there's something else
Hmm.
happening here.
Hmm. Yeah.
And and then if on the fifth time I raise my voice after I gave them the warning, I feel a lot better about it,
Yeah.
right? Like
I
as
did
long
my part.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like
Yeah.
we're learning about the world too.
Yeah.
I'm half joking, but
Yeah.
yeah, of letting them know too that
Yeah.
they have a part
Mhm.
in how they want things to go.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, that is just it is such a challenge, I think, as parents sometimes when we see ourselves not acting our best, not being who we want to be, not as intentional. And I think that that hurts us. I think a little bit. There's a lot of guilt and shame that can come into that. And then so talk to me then about that other side, the half, of the like there's the before, then what's the after? What can the repair attempt look like when because I've never done this, I don't know, but when we raise our voice, when we're short, when we've said maybe something a little sharp and as kind as we would have liked to have communicated where our frustration is like, give me what the other side of that then looks like.
Yeah, that part is really important because what we're conveying there is you don't have perfect parents. You don't need perfect parents. But if I'm going to convey that, I'm also giving my child permission not to be perfect themselves, right? And that there's something we can do when we fall short. And again, where we started was parenting's a relationship. And so even if they really deserved whatever it was, that's one way we might look at it. Well, it's because this and this has happened. But if we really care about the relationship, we want them to understand what was happening. We want them to understand what was happening for us and maybe the parts that we can take ownership over so that much later on, but much later on, I mean like, maybe before bed or not
Mhm.
not immediately in that moment too, when things have kind of settled, of checking in and can have some questions, like what that was like for them. You could share what that was like for you. Share, hey, what can we do differently next time? But that's not just for the kid to answer, but for us to answer.
Mhm.
But again, before any of that, what are we saying to ourselves? What are we saying to ourselves about um, when we're not perfect or when we're struggling, or
Mhm.
can we validate the parts of ourselves that are struggling, and we can turn that to prayer. We can and so if I need the kid to feel better, for me to feel better about those moments, we're probably not ready for that
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm. And I think we model something very unhealthy in that process to our children, that if our goal is perfection, if our goal is never making a mistake versus humility, forgiveness, coming back to them, with open heart, saying like, I didn't say that the best way that I knew I could. And we model to them something about who God is in their life. Like he is the only perfect God. We strive, we imitate as much as we can, but that process of the humility and the forgiveness is such a key piece to managing our hearts and then helping our children manage theirs when they make a mistake or don't get it perfectly.
Right. And again, it's a good pressure release to let go of this idea of my kids have to see this kind of superhuman parent instead of just a human
Mhm.
parent.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk a little bit about then how we can connect to our child's heart and maybe that innate goodness that is in who God created them to be, especially in moments where maybe our child's defiant or a little disrespectful or maybe coming at us in a way where we're becoming triggered. Like, how do I look past that behavior in my child to see what they themselves haven't connected to within their own heart?
So that's a really tough one because that
Yeah.
now we're talking in the moment.
Yes, yes.
So it's just the that self check-in again. What are the ways I show up like that? And as Christians, we show up that way all the time in the relationship with our Father, of disrespectful or ungrateful or um, all the things that we're seeing right there in that moment. And when we're approaching our kids in those moments, trying to remember that's probably not their top choice of what they want to be experiencing either.
Mm.
There's probably something else happening.
Yeah, like maybe like a lack of a skill set or something they have yet to have the words for example.
Exactly. It could be that. It could be the um the tolerance I have for discomfort as a kid,
Mhm.
or to not immediately get my way, what that experience is like. Connecting with that part, what that experience is like for them, rather than what it should be like for them, what we need to teach them it should be like, or um, tell them about why that's not correct in that moment. It's all a lot of times the parent's effort to make the moment look different
Mhm.
instead of to really connect what's happening for them. To give ourselves permission to just be with what's happening for them in the challenging moments as well as
Mhm.
the enjoyable ones, takes pressure off it having to change. We're allowed to be there for them while still we can have boundaries and there's rules and all this stuff.
Mhm.
But there's something happening on their end that we can try
Mhm.
to connect to.
Yeah, and I think you're describing the process of growth because I think of like what do I need when I'm struggling and I'm becoming dysregulated or having a hard time, whether it's in an adult relationship or like how hard it is for me to say the right things, to be calm, to
Yeah.
to find words that are more in tune with how God would want me to show up, and that's me as an adult, as somebody who's had a lot more years and practice, and sometimes we expect of our children things that we ourselves have such a hard time doing. And so, how do we, as you're saying, how do we then tap into that compassion a little bit for them, knowing that, where we were at their age, what we're still struggling with as even as adults, as people in relationships.
Yeah. So we're all a work in progress. So as parents, we're a work in progress, and more obviously, our kids are a work in progress. So checking in with the anxiousness that sometimes pops up, that this is kind of the final product if I don't do something about it right
Yeah,
now.
as an 8-year-old.
As an eight, yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if they don't learn how to take a no, or how to, and we can let them have their experience, like, connect with that experience, but not take it on as that's accurate. No, this is the experience of an 8-year-old,
Mhm.
right? And then we're gonna help shape it instead of try to fix it.
Mm. Yeah.
And all the stuff we talked about earlier,
Mm.
my opinion, is the only way we have a chance at
Mm.
that in those
Yeah.
moments
Mhm.
of, am I aware of where I'm at, what I have the capacity for,
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a hard question. I'm just in full transparency. I think we do that piece,
Mhm.
right? And then maybe we're in environments where we're seeing eyes on us, where maybe you're in the middle of church, maybe you're at a
Yeah.
family gathering, and you can almost hear the inner thoughts and the dialogue of the people around you. And maybe it's just in our own heads, but
Yeah.
like then parenting out of that fear or out of the potential criticism that what we might be receiving as how effective we are. Like, how do we not let that seep into our own narrative, the way that we show up for our children? Because I can know, like in my head, like, okay, this isn't the final result. Like, this is my 9-year-old. He's a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. But like, how do I deal with the outside noise that can get in the way of that sometimes?
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
that's me right there. But what I try to do, or what we can try to do, again, that awareness that that's happening, and sometimes you get like the tunt stares
Yeah.
at,
Yeah.
especially with, I got a very energetic
Mhm.
little one, as
Mhm.
as you know,
Mhm.
and then it might change what I would do otherwise without those looks or stares, and like you said, it's mostly in our heads.
Mhm.
It's just, um, but that reminder, okay, am I parenting for him or for them,
Mm.
right? And even what they would want is probably parent for him, like the imaginary they, because usually it's not even, it's just in our
Mhm.
minds.
Mhm.
And it-
Our own self consciousness
yeah,
kind of just seeping in. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
and so that's a really common unmet need of ours, is the approval of others and making it at least seem like we're good parents, as long as others think
Mhm.
that. And that comes with a lot of pressure on a parent. And this could be pressure and confusion on a kid
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, how come you're saying yes now just
Yeah,
because we're in the middle of a supermarket or, so and so's kind of a witness
yeah.
to this interaction? Yeah.
Or being stern now
Sure.
on
On
the
the other.
thing that I
Yes.
said,
Mhm.
right? But at home you would laugh it off.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those
Yeah. Yeah.
types of
Allowing
things.
the environment or the circumstance to change, I think what we said earlier on, which is like that posture of how we want to show up.
Yeah,
If we begin to have a little bit of that vision of who we want to be, as Christ centered, godly, calm, like intentional parents. And then when our kids say, like, okay, there's something here that makes you different, and
yeah,
then they're picking up on that. Like we can be teaching them something quite unhealthy about
right,
that dynamic.
right. And those are really good moments to
Hmm.
check in after, right? To check in after the fact of
Hmm. Yeah.
what you noticed or what you would like different, or what, rather than react to what's happening for you as a parent
And,
at
and
home.
I love to also like this is something I've been trying to do a little bit more recently is just kind of imagine how God would be looking at
Mm,
me in those moments with a lot of compassion, like not seeing a parent and a child, but God seeing two of his children,
I
right?
love that.
In that
Yeah,
moment, because I think he sees our hearts, like he sees that we might have our own issues that we're bringing to the table, and then there's that tenderness that we feel from God, like I see you, I see you're a child. There isn't a power struggle here. There's two dearly beloved, children of God that are doing their best, trying what they can. And yes, there's adjustments and things that we need to do differently, but kind of like just really making God's voice the loudest in that
right.
moment is, I think, really hard, but just necessary.
I love that, because the what we're talking about is the tendency to care about what everyone else is seeing or what we must look like to them. So I love that, reconnecting to what we look like to him, right? Or what he's seeing in
Yeah.
those moments.
Hmm. Yeah. And then again, like we can just be in those
Yeah.
moments. So then, John, what does it look like? Because, we see challenging behavior, we see things that maybe are becoming patterns in our children, and there's a little bit of fear that can kind of like creep up in us in those moments. So, how do we as parents begin to kind of separate my child's identity from the behavior, from what they might be going through at school or with their sibling. Like here's this untouched core piece. How do I make sure I'm tapping into that, communicating that to my child, and here's all the other stuff that we kind of come in and out of as people.
Right. And that one's really important, especially when our kids are struggling in multiple settings,
Mm.
right? So, of if the message we're giving is your goodness is behavior related, and we're talking to a kiddo who is not regulated enough to manage their behavior, what's the message they're getting? And a lot of times that type of kid is getting that message from other kids, from teachers, from all
It's pervasive then at
all
that
over.
point. Yeah.
And so the last thing we want is for that to be the main message at home
Mm.
too. So it's your behavior that makes you good. And those are the kids that need the most for others to see their goodness is beyond, maybe just how they're behaving.
Mhm.
And so as a parent, that takes a lot of being very intentional. And I've talked with a lot of parents where the biggest shift in making that happen is for them to give themselves permission to see their child's goodness. Not that they don't see it already, but to let that be enough,
Mm.
to let that be the core of where they want to parent from. And like you were mentioning, work on this other stuff and shift over time and so on.
Mhm.
But a lot of times, because we were just talking about, it's really easy to,
Make that everything.
yeah, and to sort of parent from the feedback, either
Mm.
imagined or real, that I'm getting from everybody else of what
Mhm.
my child is supposed to behave like or
Mm.
look like and so on. That I spent all this time trying to shift that or change that or fix that. And the things that a parent really enjoys about their child or those strengths or don't get connected to
Mhm.
enough.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing we do is give ourselves that permission
Mm.
to connect there first, to let that be the most important thing we're doing as parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that piece that you just mentioned of like what it looks like then to rob the joy from the relationship because this is our fixation. This is where all our energy and all our time and all our conversations as parents with our spouse, with other people, like is just seeing this thing over here. Maybe it's multiple
Right.
things. And then I love how someone described it one time that joy is like when you're the spark in someone else's eye, and
Mm,
if our children aren't seeing that, like we are genuinely happy to see them, to be with them, even when they're not getting it right all the time, then like, why try? Why bother? Like, I think our children can feel very discouraged in that kind of environment.
right. Yeah. There's always something I'm doing wrong. There's always something not good enough. There's always something to be corrected.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I catch myself with that all the time because I have one kiddo who's a little bit more challenging than the other, and I can tell those days when he's just looking at me as like, like, am I just a project
Mm,
to you of the things that I have yet to do or finish or the things I haven't gotten right, and I can tell from how he's responding, from just his posture, that he's defeated in those moments. And it's a very sobering experience as a parent to
yeah.
realize like, oh, like I've kind of like cut his legs from under him a little bit today because of the focus has been too much on this thing over here while missing all the good, all the godly, all the potential in my child.
Yeah. And it's really easy to do. I think have a similar dynamic,
Mhm.
right? And actually, I feel like because my younger one has necessitated it, been a lot more intentional and, oh, he's going to need my patience today and all this. And so he's gotten a lot of that. And then sometimes if I'm not careful, I just catch the older one, um, kind of trying my patience a little bit more.
Mm. Yeah.
And that inner, again, if I'm not aware of it, is like, well, that's not supposed to happen. The other one's supposed to be the challenge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so she doesn't get all the patience, and so I have to be really careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
Really, because again, it's that. I like how you said posture earlier. Of what's the way we want to show up, and what are each of our kids' unique needs?
Mm-hmm.
What do they each need from us, which might be different,
Mm-hmm.
moment to moment, and just kid to kid.
Hmm. What do you think then a child really needs to hear from us in those moments when they don't deserve, the maybe the nicest version of ours. Of course, they always need to, by God's grace, to see us trying and striving. But like their behavior does not deserve, the calm, reflective, intentional parent. But there is something that they need from us. They need to hear from us in those moments. What do you think that would be for a kid who's having a challenging day or challenging moment?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is kind of skirting the question,
Sure.
and my that I think words are overrated,
Mm-hmm.
and with kids especially, there's not a magic thing to say. There's not um, a lesson to be given. There's not always going to come from what we say,
Mm.
or I would say it's not primarily going to come from what we say. So of course we want to be mindful about
Yep.
what we're saying, but
Mm-hmm.
less pressure on that too.
Yeah.
And it's more about what we convey,
Sure.
and that's a lot different
Mm-hmm.
than what we're saying.
Yeah. No magic formula here.
No magic formula, and again, I think words are overrated. So it's more if I want to let the child know something's not okay. Let's say if I'm talking about it for 5-10 minutes of it's not really conveying it's not okay. It's saying a lot of it,
Mm-hmm.
but there's nothing being conveyed
Yeah.
because we're kind of peers in that moment having
Mm-hmm.
a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying I'm sorry, um, but like we talked about, this is what's going to happen now, and I'm able to move on. There's something being conveyed there, but then emotionally, when child's having a really hard time, and if we want to convey you're important, your I love you, your needs are important, then checking in with that too. Like I see how hard this is for you, right? I'm gonna come check in on you in a minute. If the sometimes being right there isn't actually helpful, and sometimes it is. Kind of depends on the
The
moment
child and the
and the
dynamic
kid.
and the
Yeah.
day and yeah.
Or let's leave the conversation. Can I give you a hug? You need a hug? You know,
Mm-hmm.
my both of my kids actually are very sweet. A lot of times they'll be upset at like some sternness or something that happened, and so it's at us, but they still want the hug from us, and that always warms my heart
Mm-hmm.
too. Right? That there's still that need there,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to be ready to give
Mm-hmm.
that need.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say is that, when we're putting those boundaries or when we're trying to communicate something clear in our child in that moment, that we can still have the warmth, that we can still have the tenderness that's in the context of the whole relationship. And maybe it doesn't need to be, like a 10-minute discourse
Exactly.
on what that is. And a lot of it also happens in the repair attempt after, like also less pressure on, obviously, like we want to be careful that we're not saying anything damaging or unkind in that process, but not to fit all our words in, right? Because this is our
Right.
only chance, our only opportunity to fix something.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And when we can address the thing, right, like the behavior, which is less important, without it feeling to the kid that it's a threat to how we see who they are, that thing's actually much more easy to address and kind of be able to move on from. And when it's because you always do this, or and it feels very character driven, it's going to be much harder to address because there's just more at stake. It's feeling bigger, right? And so if we always have our eyes, and just easy to say, impossible to do all the time,
Mhm.
right? But our eyes on who our kids are and what their worth is and what their value is and how much we love them, and we're addressing these things, it's just going to look different than trying to address the thing without any of that being at the forefront.
Yeah, because what you're saying then at that moment is that they're seeing, here's this thing that we can collaboratively address, where, it's not like a deficit in who I am,
Yeah.
or something broken in me. Yes, we're all sinners and we all need God's grace, but, being someone who procrastinates, or the fact that I'm struggling to get along with my brother or my sister, like that is not who I am,
Hmm.
right? Like those are things that I'm learning to do better, where I need help, where I need resources, a skill set. And one of my favorite things that I've started to do with my children is in those repair attempts to just like something very simple, saying like, this isn't who you are, like just reminding them like, this is something you do and we have to address that, but this isn't who you are, which I think our children also need to hear,
Yeah.
after they've messed up, made a mistake, because we need to hear those things too
Yeah.
as adults.
I love that. And them getting to hear who they are
Mhm.
from
Yep.
our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How funny and caring and
Yep.
and so those things exist while we're working on shaping
Mm-hmm.
these other things.
Yeah.
How can we help them see that?
Yep. Yep. So then, if I'm noticing as a parent, I'm stuck in that cycle of maybe focusing too much on the behavior or the outcome or that transactional kind of way of parenting. How do I begin to reconnect to first? I'm hearing you say my heart,
Mm-hmm.
and where those needs are, and so that I can be more present with connecting to my child's heart.
Right. So right. So we started with where the parent is at in their capacity, and then a really practical way is start with however small. It could be 1 minute, but 5 minutes, let's say, on the shorter end of for these 5 minutes, I'm going to connect with what my child cares about, with what my child wants to do, with um, what they're going to enjoy right now. So if I'm in those 5 minutes, I'm not going to ask a single question. I'm just going to make a lot of comments. It's going to be centered on something they care about, right? Either a game or activity or a conversation, or because what we're doing there too is we're giving them an opportunity to let that unique goodness out, and we're giving ourselves an opportunity to really get to see it and connect with it and start there. And for a lot of families and a lot of parents, and a lot of kids, the kind of day-to-day grind and needing to get the homework done and the morning routine and nighttime routine, all of that stuff is just it's there. And we're talking a lot about what we can do to shape that too. But one of the best things we can do is to fill up that other bucket
Mm.
of just that quality time
Mhm.
together, even if it's as little as 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And that bucket, it's certainly quality time as you're sharing, and then paying attention to our child's love language. Is kind of what I'm picking up. You sharing whether that's a shared interest or maybe an area that you're not all that interested in. Maybe you don't
Yeah.
care about Pokemon,
Right.
but all of a sudden you need to, because this is a point of connection, a point of being able to spend that time because it's meaningful for your child, and what it means for them to see you as invested in the things they care about because they care about it, in a way that you maybe don't
Exactly.
as much.
And as a parent, you're not invested in learning about Pokemon.
Mhm.
That's why I don't think it's helpful to ask so many questions necessarily, but you're invested in connecting with your child's joy of
Mhm.
Pokemon,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And getting to, so you can even say that. I love how much you know about this. You're able to memorize
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
many things.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the red one. Like
So as far as
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, same. But whatever
Yeah.
comments you can
Mhm.
make
Yeah.
to help kind of grow
Mhm.
the interaction itself,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My children are both really into basketball. And one of the most helpful things that I've ever heard a coach share with parents, after a game or a tournament or something, like, when you get into the car, like just, like that inner kind of pull to like talk about the game or, what one player did or that, like, just like hold back on that just a little bit and start with like, it was just so fun to watch you play. Like I loved watching you play, and I realized like that lights them up versus like, just did you see how much I scored or like whatever point? Like like that's one thing, but like the joy of someone being present for them and to connect that's where our heart is as parents. Like there's really something so profound about that.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, which they want to hear about the how awesome they did too,
Of course.
right? But
Room for
just
both.
room
Yeah.
room for
Yeah.
both. Okay, then. So, John, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, I'm curious how we can begin to see God's heart for us as parents, and maybe the way that shapes how we then respond to our children. Like if there's something missing in my spiritual relationship with God, like how can that show up sometimes in the way that I'm parenting, or like what can make it hard if I'm not rooted, or if I'm not finding like stability in who God sees me to be.
I think a lot of times we're talking about for parenting being a relationship, we're talking about seeing the goodness in our kids regardless of how they're showing up, and that they're loved and enough even with all this other stuff that's there to be shaped and worked on and all these things. But I think a lot of times as parents, we have a hard time connecting to that reality is true with ourselves in our relationship with God too. And a lot of times we're summing up who we are in these behaviors of the day, what I did, what I didn't do, what I said, what I didn't say, and not just with parenting, just in general. And so to really reflect and connect with, that is how God shows up for us. That is how God loves us, regardless of our imperfections or our shortcomings or all the things that we know to do and didn't. That doesn't shift the way that God sees us and
Hmm.
loves us. And
Hmm.
and and so sometimes it's connecting if I really believe that or not. Because the more connected we are to that, the easier it's going to be to give that
Hmm.
to our kids.
Yeah. If I'm hearing this as a parent and I'm noticing maybe I'm not as connected to my belovedness as a
Mm,
child of God, that I am maybe struggling to see that in my relationships, like where can a parent begin then to be more intentional about that process, to heal some of those areas so that we can then connect with our children in maybe healthier, more full ways?
right, right, and using that prayer life, that life with God, to fill that up. Because another very it can feel powerless, but actually like powerful thing is to recognize how limited we are. So we want it to look a certain way. We want to have all the energy all the time, be present all the time, and we're just so limited. But as Christians, we're connected to an unlimited source. So what are the ways that we can ask him to work through us rather than relying on ourselves? And if we're asking that, if we're um, connected to that throughout the day, my mom always says in our adulthood, if somebody came and gave like a compliment to me or my brother, like, "Oh, you raised such great kids," she says, um, "I didn't do anything. I asked God to do it." Right, and so that concept for us really try to adopt of, as much as I'm relying on myself, it's going to be limited, and relying on him, as all the things I do wrong as parents, all as a parent, all the shortcomings, he can cover up. So
I love that so much, John. Like what it means for us to recognize our limitation, not as a deficit, but as a need to connect
right,
to an unlimited God, our source,
yeah,
our place of renewal, our well, our very deep well. So I love that so much. And what
yeah.
a profound and awesome place for us to end our conversation today, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've been edified as always, and we pray that if this conversation touched your heart, hopefully, it's all about taking care of our hearts, to please share this message, and please continue to pray for us as we pray for your family. Thank you so much.